Welcome to the CII-CURT Conference, Day 2. Today's first session focuses on achieving capital efficiency with modular chemical process intensification and how to improve capital efficiency through competitive investment decisions. Later, you will learn how a smart data-centric collaborative approach can establish a tightly knit supply chain and minimize the risk during project transfers. We will also explore lean construction principles and practices that can help achieve reduced carbon footprint goals and improve our environmental stewardship. Our keynote speakers are Anirban Basu and Julia Landauer. Anirban will provide an economic data and analysis juxtaposing the pre-pandemic and pandemic world, and then supply a forecast for the post-pandemic era. Julia will share her thoughts on being a female in a male-dominated space and how the STEM-related fields can be applied to many different fields of study and industries. We look forward to connecting with you in the Innovation Showcase to continue the conversations and dive deeper into these conference topics. We know you'll enjoy seeing your old and new friends in the exhibits.
Well, good morning, everyone. Oh, we got to do better than that, especially you folks on the sides. Let's try it once more. Good morning, everyone. Yes, in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to stand, but I don't want you to move. We're not going to do anything creepy, but we are going to do something funny. I want you to stand on the count of 3 and find somebody close, fist bump them at an arm's length, and say, "My, you look marvelous." On the count of 3, ready? 1, 2, 3. Everybody standing. Fist bump. My, you look marvelous. Okay, wonderful. I hope you had a great time last night, and I want to take a special moment and welcome our virtual attendees. We have 2 or 3 dozen virtual attendees who are joining us this morning. That's why we have the cameras strategically placed. And for those of you who are joining us virtually, we welcome you as well. You're not forgotten. We welcome you into our space, into our narrative, and we trust that you'll stick with us as well the entire day. If you were at last night's cocktail party, let's show hands, and then put the other one together, and let's show our appreciation for our many sponsors. It was a great time, and these are always thoughtfully produced. It gives us an opportunity to network, to greet our old friends, and God knows we need that, and to meet some new relationships as well. So for those many sponsors, they're listed on your apps. They're also scrolling throughout the conference on the screens behind me. Please accept our gratitude for your generosity, which helped make those events possible. The food was abundant, the entertainment was fun, and most of all, the people who were there made that a success. Resilience through innovation. There could not be 3 more powerful words that represents where we are as an industry today. We have to be resilient, and we have. COVID has touched all of our lives. I've lost a friend to COVID. Some of you in the room have had it and suffered through it. And of course, we're all trying to avoid contracting it or any Delta variant that might be out there, and we will do it. We are a resilient industry comprised of resilient people. The second word is through. The importance of that word is that, Winston Churchill once said, when you're going through hell, keep going. And that's what we're doing with this pandemic. That's what we're doing with the alliance creation. We are going through our obstacles, through our detractors, through that which would hold us back, and we will achieve our goals. The only distance between our vision and our reality is action. And this is an action-oriented group. If not us, who? And if not now, when? And the last word, innovation, as evidenced by our alliance discussions, while it's not a done deal, we're making good progress with good momentum, and we're excited about what the future holds working together. I think Jim Ellis said it yesterday, and I jotted down. He said the preferred, let's see, I thought I jotted it down. There it is. He said, I'm a firm believer in the art of possibility. And we are too. And we're excited to engage you in that conversation. And we're excited to create game change for our industry. Stephen?
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, actually, even when we came up with the theme resilience through innovation, we were commenting earlier that maybe we could have even been reversed, innovation through resilience. You know, that the experience of the last 18 months has created the space to have a lot of innovation. So innovation through resilience, and you can mix and match that however you want. Well, so good morning to day two. Let me add my welcome. I'm going to talk just a really brief moment about safety. These are the same safety slides essentially that we showed yesterday. So just remember, as Doug and Jim talked about yesterday, we are following all the current local safety mandates. Masks are required for our staffs and attendees unless actively eating or drinking, and really that's the recommendation. Hand sanitizer is available in most spaces. Disposable masks are available at the registration desk if you need one, and of course we have spaced everything out. It turns out that this spacing also works for other reasons, just that you're more comfortable. I think the room setup was done really well, so hopefully you're all able to see the stage and the screens, and it seems to be working pretty well. We're keeping the doors to the ballrooms and the different spaces open, and of course, above all, if you start not feeling well, please seek medical attention. To get out of this particular conference space, we're going to go basically straight out the back. There's some staircases, and you'll go down and then go to the outside. One thing to mention on these, we don't know that there are any alarms, but we actually had this before one time that there was an alarm, so it's important that we follow the directions that are being given. So sometimes they want you to stay in place, and sometimes they want you to exit. So we're going to follow the directions that the hotel's provided. So depending on what the nature of the emergency is, depends on what the response. But if we have to exit the building, that's the map of where you'll go.
Stephen, are you pretty good at an emergency? There's two types of people. There's one that run in circles and vomit, then there's the other who take action and try to do something. Which one are you? Because
hopefully I'm in the second group, yeah. And then if you have to exit the Innovation Showcase, it's actually, you're going to exit that direction. I think that's to the south. So if you're in the exhibit space where the meals are, you're going to exit I think that's west, yeah, and then that would be to the south. Okay, and then, we'd like you to have the best experience possible. Absolutely, please use the app, the conference app. Make sure you do that. Also, while you're looking at the conference app, make sure that your phone is not going to ring, so set that to vibrate. I think everybody's got their name badges by now, but do what you need to do to take care of yourself and be alert and really take everything in that we're going to show you today. Today is really a great day. Some really amazing presentations. A lot of work went into these different research teams and the presentations, and great keynote speakers as well. So it's going to be an exciting morning and afternoon together. And Greg?
Thanks, Stephen. Also note the conference hashtag. When you take photos, and there are many of them being taken, I will have you note the hashtag. It helps us keep a pictorial record of the conference, if you will, and we want you to use the hashtag, and we want to use your pictures. We're excited to do it.
And then the Wi-Fi, CII-CURT, and the password. And I know the Wi-Fi's been a little bit uneven. I've experienced that, but I think if you're patient with it, it eventually comes around. That's been my experience. So just if you're wondering what the network and the password is, they're up here. All caps CII 2021 and all caps on CURT.
Thank you, Stephen, for all that. And thank you for being here. Thank you for minding our schedule. We'll try to do our best to mind our part. But we want to thank you especially again for being here and populating this conference. It's us who make it, not the audio and the visual and the PowerPoints. It's the men and women in this room who make this conference a success. And I want to take a moment and thank you. Are you ready to get started, Stephen?
I'm absolutely ready.
Great.
Yep.
Turn your attention to the screen and let's go.
Combining modularization with process intensification has resulted in a rethinking of plant design. Modular chemical process intensification, MCPI, has recently emerged as a strategic opportunity for some chemical manufacturers to gain a stepwise advantage over competitors. This presentation examines the learnings from MCPI case studies and compares them against conventional projects. The team will share economic findings that pertain to differences in CapEx, OpEx, NPV, payback periods, and project duration. Here to present, please welcome Jim O'Connor and Brian Paul.
Good morning. Good morning. This morning we're going to connect modular chemical process intensification with capital efficiency. We're going to do that by reporting findings from case studies. These are case studies with a focus on economic impact. Before I leave this slide, though, I do want to express our appreciation and acknowledgement to CII and Rapid for co-funding the study. It's been, what, about 3 years, Brian? Something like that. And it's been a lot of fun. So here's a what if for you. What if your next project required a fraction of the plant volume, had 87% less CapEx, 14% less OpEx, had 1/5 the payback period, and almost twice the net present value? What if? What I would say is, if you could make that claim, you'll be up here next year. But the question is how. So in fact, this is exactly what our first case study was about. How did it happen? There's this sort of quirky, complicated process, or I should say project strategy, really, called modular chemical process intensification. It's a bit complicated, and we're going to talk about that, break it down into its pieces. There's this process intensification piece, which often leads to a reduced footprint. There is, and with a reduced footprint modularization, there's a piece regarding geographical distribution and mobility, and that also connects to modularization. And then there's this design one, build many piece that can connect with numbering up. So we'll tie all this stuff together as we go through this. Let's start with the essence of modularization. It's essentially about exporting work hours from a conventional stick-built job site to a more preferred location, typically a fabrication shop. And it's interesting, I was thinking last night that really over 35 plus years, CII has done about 5 studies on modularization. There was one in the late 90s that declared it a best practice. So CII was formalizing best practices at the time, you may recall that. Shortly thereafter, the Breakthrough Strategy Committee declared it a breakthrough strategy. So in their mind, this was an opportunity for stepwise advancement. More recently, we had RT 283 this is about 7 years ago, they came up with 5 solution elements. Their charge was, what does it take to advance the industry? And that team came up with 5 solution elements. The first 3 pertain to the project level. And the first one is a work process for running the business case. At the bottom, we have critical success factors, identification and characterization of these. One of the surprising learnings there was owners can be the biggest problem. Like 60% of the critical success factors belong to the owners, and that's sometimes the problem, right? And then recognition that execution planning differences are many when you compare conventional stick-built with modularization. The fourth solution element comes back to the design once, build many standardization strategy. It's at the business unit level. And then the last piece comes back to the industry as a whole. And it's about what can the industry do collectively to change the landscape. That's a little bit about modularization. I'm now going to hand it over to Brian. He's going to elaborate on process intensification.
Thanks, Jim. So as I've been introduced, Brian Paul from Oregon State. So I'm a professor of manufacturing engineering, but I am also a focus area leader in the Rapid Institute on module manufacturing. The focus of the Rapid Institute is outreach to advance process intensification within the chemical process industry. So what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about what chemical process intensification is and why it leads to the shrinking of the footprint of chemical plants. So probably the simplest definition of process intensification is provided by Andrei Stankovic at TU Delft. So when you really look at the bottom line of this, it's really about chemical engineering innovation. Any kind of chemical engineering innovation across any kinds of process steps is going to lead to some advances. And when we think about those advances, initially some of the intensification efforts were around reducing capital investment and so capital expenditure. And what was kind of found is that the reduced capital investment also led to things like improved safety. So how does that work? So if you're going to reduce the size of your plant, you're probably reducing the size of your reaction volume. That's going to reduce exposure to various people and so on. And another kind of waterfall kind of effect associated with that is by reducing the size of the plant overall, components are now closer to one another, and so the opportunity to be able to use exothermic energies from one process step in another process step that's endothermic, let's say, provides improvements in energy and some of those things. And so some of these other benefits were found as well, and one of the things that we did in our study was look through the literature and look at what a lot of these different kinds of advantages are. I want to get now kind of turn to an operational definition of what I mean by chemical process intensification. So this comes out of Pacific Northwest National Labs. I'm up in the Pacific Northwest, and so we kind of hang out together. One of the things that a technology that's pretty exciting that has come out recently is this solar thermochemical processing plant. So a pretty small footprint here. The market for this, so first of all, that little reaction nacelle up there is the chemical plant. And so we're taking focused energy from the sun and putting it on a steam methane reforming reactor. And so what's going into that is natural gas and steam, and what's coming out of that is then syngas and in particular hydrogen for automotive fuel cells. So the idea is to put something like this at a filling station, and so it's got to be fairly compact. Now, one of the real challenges here is when you start to look at this, and why do we need process intensification, is if you look at conventional technology, I think that reaction nacelle has about 6 components on it. Heat exchangers and reactors, a purifier, I think, as well. When you just look at one of the heat exchangers, plate and frame heat exchanger that's currently in the supply chain, it's larger than the plant itself. And literally, when we started out on this project, that was the case. So the idea of being able to reduce the size of those components allows us to put a chemical plant 12 foot off the ground, right? And so the size and weight kind of effects of these kinds of components, in this case, microchannel heat exchangers, are well understood. So this is data from about 20 years ago, work that Pacific Northwest National Labs did, and you see about a 28x reduction in size, same pressure drop, same effectiveness and duty in terms of some of the different components. So on the right side, far right side, you see a couple of the key components that were developed in being able to enable this, this plant. And so there's a recuperator, high temperature recuperator there in the middle that's produced by Metal Additive Manufacturing. And so I've worked with them in being able to get the costs and such down. The bottom is the SMR, the steam methane reforming plant itself. Okay, so another look at process intensification. So we started talking about equipment now, and smaller equipment and capabilities. And so what I want you to see here is that when you start to index the number of technologies, it kind of breaks down into equipment and methods. What do I mean by that? So you just saw some of the different kinds of equipment. Microchannel heat exchanger is one of many different kinds of equipment. So chemical process intensification is not one thing. It's many things. And so this is something to recognize. On the right side, the equipment has supply chain with it. So that lowers technical risk. There are suppliers out there of that sort of thing. On the left side, sometimes what's in the supply chain isn't adequate for what you need to be able to move and intensify your plant. So there's methods to move us forward in doing that. And again, Professor Stankovich has summarized these into the 4 tenets of process intensification. And just to give you an idea, I don't want to dwell here, but this is basically what any kind of chemical engineering project is probably going to fall into one of these 4 or maybe several of these tenets simultaneously. So if we just take one, for example, here, what you have give each molecule the same processing experience. So chemistry is molecules, right? Trillions times trillions of molecules that we're processing at any point in time. And so we can do that in a batch mode. That's what you see as a stir tank reactor. And on the left, and then on the right, let's say a tubular reactor. And so it's continuous flow. On the right, we could put that continuous reactor in terms of each molecule seeing the same experience. We put a plug flow across that, and we could have a very small defined reaction zone that has, where all the molecules are pretty much seeing the same thermal history. Whereas on the left side, when we put that in a big stir tank reactor, concentration gradients, thermal gradients are going to cause the reaction to be spread out over a long period of time. So going to the right side is that continuous, going from batch to continuous, an example of an innovation that intensifies a process. And so I want to summarize what's the symbiosis here. Why do we call it modular chemical process intensification? So that kind of intensification of components and process technology obviously facilitates modularization in terms of smaller plants. And then that allows us to have the plant be mobile. And so there's various kinds of geographical distribution kinds of scenarios that people are using that to their advantage. It could be needing to put a plant next to a customer. It could be challenges in the supply chain. Let's say we're talking about a process chemistry that has a particular shelf life, peroxides, for example. We need to make it as we need it. So there's various ways that we can use that, and people are finding ways to do that. Finally, I would say what we're starting to see is beyond those distributed applications is in the chemical process industry itself, particularly specialty chemical, this notion of flexibility and capacity. So, we've had workshops where we've had owners that have kind of come in and kind of said, look, if you can get my first plant into a new market down from the $50 million, $100 million kind of dollar level down to $5 to $10 million, It's like 2 lower levels of management to be able to make that decision. And we can move much quicker and much faster if we can be able to do that. So the idea is it allows you to get in the market fast, to see whether it's going someplace. And if it starts to go someplace, you can number up to scale up to be able to get to that capacity. So those are some of the advantages and reasons that people are looking at modular chemical process intensification. What we want to do is the back half of our presentation now is we want to start to talk about some case studies to bring this to life a little bit and show you some real numbers. The first case study is going to focus on an owner, chemical plant owner, that did innovation themselves. It was a batch to continuous mode, and so reduction in CapEx was the motivation there. The last two are going to be technology developers, and they developed to be able to deploy various products and plants in the marketplace, and so I'll spend some time looking at those two, and then we're going to have case study 1. Jim is going to get us through that before I wrap us up.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so here's a kind of a recap of some of the basis factors, we'll say, to give you a frame. So we said manufacturer operators, the perspective, the distributed piece was the customer. That doesn't have to have that, but in this case they did. It's a specialty chemical, so it's high value, low volume. Think about it like that. As far as the PI innovation goes, it's a tubular reactor off the shelf. No new technology equipment was needed here. What was needed was an innovative design and an initiative to pursue that. Very importantly, the design goes from batch to continuous, and we'll come back to that. Reduced CapEx was the objective. You're going to see a startling plant size reduction of 250x, which, as you can imagine, drives a lot of CapEx, certainly. As far as the timing of the analysis, it was 1 year post-pilot, so we basically had one proven plant. And then there was no numbering up here, but there was design 1, build many. So they engineered it one time and have been knocking it out ever since. So here's a side-by-side comparison. In every case study, it was about conventional stick-built versus MCPI. In some cases, we had to tweak it a little bit because we needed the same annual production numbers for a side-by-side comparison. So with CSB, we have a 2-day or 48-hour batch approach versus continuous with MCPI. We have a stir tank reactor, quite sizable, 12,000 gallons, versus a tubular reactor. Then we have a lot of heating going on in the batch process, a lot of heat loss, not so much, of course, with MCPI. And because of that 2-day cycle, we have flushing and purging every 2 days, and that introduces a lot of effort, a lot of operator influence, et cetera. And then cooling, water versus air. So you can start to see some influences on CapEx, but even more evidently, influences on OpEx. Here's more CapEx drivers. So we have serious height differences, huge footprint differences. So we have 5x on height, we have 50x on footprint. Together, it gives us 250x. And you can see the little white box, maybe, you barely see it there in the corner. And that's what we're dealing with. So even if that MCPI piece is 5 times as dense, that's almost nothing still, right? And then don't forget about brownfield SIMOPS, right? So we have a huge safety threat, safety hazard with CSB. It's much reduced with the MCPI. Here's CapEx differences. So we have 3.5 million versus 450,000. You can see how the engineering is side by side. So it's 350 versus 55. Time to production, 74 weeks in a conventional stick built. Now, this company has been doing these projects, dozens and dozens of these projects for decades. So they've got the data. So there it is, 74 weeks. MCPI version, 22 weeks. It's a 70% reduction in time to market. It's kind of a roll-up of the facts on this one. So 87% lower CapEx, nearly twice the net present value, 80% shorter payback period. Operations and maintenance full-time equivalent, 91% lower. Power and utilities, not having to heat it up and cool it down, right? 40% lower. And OpEx, 14% lower. Last piece of this case study was through literature and through interactions with our CII industry advisory team, we identified 55 different drivers of mostly cost savings, some cost additions, but mostly cost savings. We presented that to our source. We said which ones were most significant. In the first round, he identified about half of them, and we said we needed to tighten it up more than that. Ultimately, we got it down to the top 6, and here they are. So we have PI equipment is smaller, cheaper, and off the shelf, most importantly. That can lead to lower weight for foundations, for support structure. That can lead to reduced installation time and effort, and of course that SIMOPS that goes with that. That can lead to earlier recovery of investment. And then on top of all this, you've got module fab shop productivity improvements, and you've got performance assurance enhancement through pre-shipment testing. Last thing I want to say about this case study is that it really came about because of the champion that pushed it through the company. So this is a pretty sizable company, and if that individual had not been pushing this as a part of his personal passion, who knows if it ever would have happened. So it took somebody with some guts, some courage, and was willing to go out on a limb and try it out, and it's been viewed as a tremendous success. I'm going to hand it back to Brian. He's got 2 more case studies.
Thanks, Jim. So, yeah, we want to look at a couple more case studies. And one caveat here associated with these, you're seeing some generic descriptions, right? Commodity chemicals and the process technologies or reactors and separators and different things. One of the things that I want to stress is in order to get the confidence of our clients, we had to sign non-disclosure agreements. And so everything that we're sharing with you has been cleared with them, but there's certain things they don't want us to share. And so there's questions you can ask us. We're a fountain of knowledge here with regard to these and what we're finding. But there's some things that we're probably not going to be able to satisfy on. Again, case study 2 is now we're moving into that methods side. I talked about the tenets of chemical process intensification. This is a situation where we have an entrepreneur taking technology to market. So this is very early in the cycle. The technology is not actually in the market. And we took the same approach that Jim just talked about, and we approached this early innovator. And the innovation opportunity was around distributed energy, cheap distributed energy. And so the thought was to be able to capture that in the chemistry that was going to be developed, the commodity chemistry. In order to do that, there were 2 necessary things. One was to make it mobile, had to make it small, and so the separations technology, many times that's where the cost and the size of the plant is. And so there was a well-known capability that typically not used. It's very energy intensive, but is at the same time very compact or fairly compact. And so most of the 8x reduction in footprint came on the separation side. On the catalytic side, when you go to a distributed model, you got feedstock concerns, right? So you're going to put it in different places. And so to be able to drive toward, in this case, I think air and water, to give you an example of some of the kind of generic feedstocks, required less waste management on the back end, less pre-processing on the front end. And so those were some of the considerations in development of a new catalytic reactor here. So there was the intellectual property involved. And so we're at the proof of concept stage. So again, laying out the modular chemical process intensification approach with a conventional stick-built approach in terms of competition of different technologies here. So we see a much larger footprint overall, that 18,000 square foot compared to what Jim just talked about on the front end. But even with that, we saw about 8x reduction in plant area. That's not volume, so there's an even larger volume reduction in the plant. Similar impact on operations. This would be of an energy producing facility. Minimal impact versus a conventional stick-built approach. And so these are some of the estimates to the far right of, that we took into consideration. One of the thoughts with scaling the MCPI approach is there's a fair amount of automation in the plant that allows them to maintain that 8 full-time equivalent as they scale up. 80% learning curve associated with making the second, third, fourth version of the chemical plant off-site, and then ultimately the scale-up strategy here, we assumed at the start they'd want to try it before they buy it, so to speak. First year they'd build one plant, second year, and then beyond that double up. That's just the initial analysis and some of the things. I'm going to try to break this down fairly quickly here. I don't want to overwhelm you with data, but on the far right is the net present value back to the customer. And what we found is that while the MCPI approach was superior, it's got an 8-year payback at 10% discount rate. So that's not attractive in many cases. And so the client was in the perspective of what do we do and where are the opportunities. And one of the things that we see here is the OpEx, actually the improvements in reducing feedstock costs were offset by that separation unit I talked about. Is very energy intensive, so even though the utility rates were fairly low, this was not something that was anticipated. Basically, there's a wash there, so OpEx, there's not a lot of opportunity. In CapEx, at the capacities being evaluated, 33% reduction in CapEx is pretty good, but you can see here that what's really driving it is the equipment cost. And then what we see on the far right is it took 4 years to scale up the plant. And so why are we using that artificial 4 years? What would happen if we moved that down to a single year to scale up to capacity, building eight modular units simultaneously? What also would happen if we controlled the cost of our process and technology, process intensification technology? So when you see the equipment number being as high as it is, that's the impact of PI. If you're not paying attention to the development of the technology and the costs associated with that, it can really drive you where you don't want to go. But here, under those two assumptions, first, basically 1 year to market with our chemical capacity and equilibrating the cost with conventional stick-built led us to a 2.5-year payback potentially. These were the things that were not considered. I understand that this is hypothetical, but this is people entering this field. One of the things that they didn't realize was how much the CapEx would be driven by the equipment costs, and so the process intensification. So if we take that route of developing new technology, got to be sophisticated enough to control those R&D expenditures over time. And then we talked about the higher demand. I think the takeaways for me here, MCPI, not one size fits all, right? I hope that you're getting the sense for that. Got to have chemical engineers involved that are picking the appropriate technologies for the appropriate process steps that we have. And then this notion that PI technology development must be managed. I want to contrast that one with a very mature application of MCPI. It's our third case study. We have a fourth case study. It wasn't ready for time, and we don't have enough time to discuss it as it is. But I wanted to talk about one more situation where it's intermediate commodity that's being provided in the supply chain to chemical plant owners. And so there's distribution challenges with the particular chemical here. The developer of the modular plant also developed a new reactor and pressure swing absorption system, and actually has patents on this technology in the process of putting that together. The footprint reduction here is on the same order as what Jim talked about. So 52x, I think Jim's was 50x reduction in footprint size. So pretty sizable reduction as a result of that PI technology. And the data that you're going to be looking at has 6 years of in the market. So I think 230 plus deployments. So we can learn a lot from this. They do implement numbering up kind of strategies. We talked about the difference in process technology, the footprint, 52x reduction in size, and then you see some of the assumptions there on the far right that goes into our analysis. So at the capacity of 300 normal cubic meters per hour, which is our baseline capacity, what you see is about a 30 to 40% reduction in OpEx. That's due to labor cost reductions, but it's also because there's a higher level of automation in the plants. And then it's also due to some feedstock improvements with the process and better conversion efficiencies. On the CapEx side, we see about a 50% reduction, and so that's substantial and sizable. What's interesting here is that when we ran the numbers, what they typically have, they told us this ahead of time before we did the analysis, is that if it's over 3 plants, and so here to go from a 300 normal cubic meters per hour plant to 900, we would require 3 modular plants to get there. And they do that. They never go to 4, and now we know why, because the economics just don't work out. So there's nothing magical here. It's just understanding the economics. When you look at the CapEx side, what this clearly shows is the interconnecting systems are being significantly impacted here. 38x reduction in the cost of piping, about 10x reduction in the electrical conduits that were required. Why? Because they're smaller components, they're closer together, and we don't need as much. So when we look overall and summarize what we can learn from here, similar kind of a waterfall here, right? PI equipment requires less interconnecting system, and that's because there's less land, and so less construction footprint means a smaller construction scope, and then ultimately less time, installation time and labor. We can put the capital to work faster as a result of this, in addition to some of the engineering and modular fabrication, design one, build many kind of aspects of a savings that they saw. So 2 more slides here and then we're done. Just summarize kind of what you've seen. So batch to continuous. What's exciting to me is there's a lot of distributed applications that are moving forward, fairly small plants. What we're starting to see is larger footprint plants starting to go this route. I don't think this is for bulk chemical production, but when we think about specialty chemical types of applications, the notion of going from batch to continuous is beginning to be looked at as promising. I think batch plants are much more flexible capacity than continuous, but that's being worked on as well. How can we develop these modular plants so that we can take out some of the reaction and separations and replace them without having to rebuild the plant completely? The second thing that we see is, if you're not using off-the-shelf technology, our first case study used off-the-shelf technology. It's a way to reduce technical risk. But many times the business case isn't there. You have to develop your own. You got to know what you're doing, right? So you got to manage the construction of that equipment. Many times that doesn't have a supply chain with it. So that's where metal additive manufacturing and where I'm having some impact in some of these projects is being able to find ways to produce those components without having to have a supply chain. And last thing that I'd say is obviously the interconnecting systems is where we're seeing big impacts in overall scopes of these projects. So Last slide, and Jim's going to wrap it up for us.
Okay, so we've seen a lot here. We've got, we didn't tell you about our fourth case study, but we do have 4. Every one of them is a little bit unique and a little bit different. Some takeaways here. The first one is that this can be game-changing, but are you prepared for it, right? Are you prepared to handle new paradigms in how you design plants? That's where you might start. The second one is the point Brian made with case study number 2, which is manage the benefits. Pay attention to the cost of equipment. Pay attention to the amount of utilities you're consuming. That developer was a little bit towards the naive end, right? This was the first of a kind. This was, think of it as almost a startup kind of thing. And it was pretty evident in the economics. And then the last one is pay attention to your culture. So in that first case study, upper management, not so supportive. Second case study, total startup situation. Innovation's the buzzword, okay? Guess what? They didn't pay attention to economics, though. Third one was supportive. Third one, you had this big company. You had a very supportive culture. They knocked it out, and they made it work on a big-time scale. And so in that first case study, we needed to have that visionary champion. And without that individual, this likely would not have succeeded, okay? So with that, we're done with the presentation, and we're ready to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
My name's Colin Troy. I'm with the Construction and Fabrication Group at Fluor. I'll be taking our presenters through various questions this morning. So that was a fantastic presentation, Jim and Brian.
Yeah.
One of the first questions that came in was, with all the case studies that we looked at, there was a dramatic reduction in footprint, dramatic reduction in cost. But just to be clear, are we talking about facilities that have the same throughput between the CSB and the MCPI cases?
The answer to that is yes.
Yes.
So that was controlled. That was one of the things that we looked at in both studies.
So we're not talking about carving a big plant up into a bunch of little plants. We're
No.
talking about taking that big plant and shrinking it down to very
Same
small.
annual production.
Same
production.
capacities
Yep.
of the two.
That's great to hear. Jim, this question's for you. Can you elaborate on the need for an MCPI champion in early applications?
So as I just said, it goes back to an assessment of your culture, right? So if you don't have a supportive culture, supportive upper management, you're going to rely on a champion, and you're going to have to give that champion license. It so happened this guy was kind of like me. He was about to retire, and I think his attitude was, I have nothing to lose here.
Yeah, that's right.
So he went for broke, and you know, has made the company a lot of money. So you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's good. Good summary.
So changing direction of questions. Was environmental sustainability improved with any of the MCPI case studies? More importantly, was that a requirement of the owner?
So one of the things that I would say is 2 of the case studies were developed within the Rapid Institute, something like 35 different projects that have had federal funding. That federal funding is from the Department of Energy, so that's a requirement for those projects. So we didn't report on that specifically here, but yes, I think there were substantial energy savings that were achieved. You saw the second case study. That was one of the challenges, right? So the actual energy requirements went up because the opportunity was, quote, free energy. But that's not the norm. Normally we see a reduction. I think in the other 3 case studies we've seen reductions, significant reductions in energy requirements.
Yeah, you saw that in case study number 1.
Okay, next question. And combining a couple of them here, there's a few in this area. How does modular process intensification impact operations and maintenance? What impact does it have on the operators? And how does it change maintenance in terms of your regular O&M, changing out pieces of equipment, and turnarounds? What does that do to turnarounds?
Yeah, those are good questions, and we did look at operations and maintenance as part of our operational expenses and such. And so I think that particularly case study 3 kind of bears out that at least to the customer, the plant owner in this particular case, that there wasn't significant impact on the operations and maintenance associated with having 3 plants versus a single conventional stick-built plant.
And in case study number 1, remember we had a significant FTE reduction on O&M, right? We also had the significant SimOps reduction. So that's all about safety.
That's great. Next question. This creates a dilemma for EPC companies. They make less money if they engage in this. Essentially, the cost is all in equipment and not so much in plant design. Piping and electrical are way down, for instance. Any suggestions on how we overcome this? Perhaps we change the value of the services.
And so just clarification on that question. It sounds like we're saying that this is potentially going to reduce the opportunity for engineering procurement and construction firms. Is that
right? The percentage of your capital is now gone towards equipment manufacturers as opposed to EPCs.
Mm-hmm. And how do we deal with that? That's a great question.
That is not a softball.
they can come work for me.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say is that this is this is a trend. I don't think we're looking at, it's a small segment of the market right now. Where does this go in the future? We'll just kind of have to see how chemical manufacturers adopt the technology going forward. So I guess I'd say it's more of an FYI, right? This is a trend in the chemical process industry.
So that leads nicely into the next question. What other sectors might this apply to? Could this work in pharmaceuticals, consumer goods, food and beverage? What are some other possibilities of using this idea?
Yeah, so what I'd say is probably the place that continuous processing has gotten its biggest foothold is in pharmaceuticals. A lot of pharmaceutical manufacturers, there's companies in the supply chain now that will put together basically glass desktop kinds of plants and stuff that can produce pharmaceutical kind of quantities of these things. And so in pharmaceuticals, you have low production volume, but really high value, right? And so that's where it's entered the marketplace. And so what you start to see here with what we're talking about is that starting to move down to specialty chemical, right? So it's now specialty chemicals seeing the case. I don't think the case there is necessarily just high value chemicals, but as I mentioned earlier before, specialty chemical, if it can get its costs down, I think address one of the questions earlier. I had a workshop inside of Rapid where we had specialty chemical owners, plant owners, together with EPCs. And one of the EPC folks stood up and said, instrumentation doesn't change. You're going to need as much instrumentation on one plant versus the other. By the way, one of our case studies shows that instrumentation actually dropped for the MCPI plant. But in general, that's true. One of the chemical plant owners said, look, I don't, it's not about instrumentation, it's about net present value. And I can't get to that net present value if the cost of my plant's $50 million. 100 million. Literally, this is what was being said in the workshop, and they were exchanging perspectives and views. I need to get into a new chemical market for specialty chemical. I need to be able to get the cost of that initial plant down. So I don't care if my instrumentation costs went way up. If it's a $5 to $10 million decision, my management level can make that determination to go ahead and make that investment. So it's a different proposition for different parts of the chemical processing segment. I think, high value pharmaceuticals, it's the way that they do a lot of their processing now. Specialty chemicals, not as high value, much larger volumes. It's beginning to find its way in. Commodity and bulk chemicals, I don't think we're there yet, although there are projects in the Rapid Institute that are working on commodity chemicals as well.
All right. I think that takes us to the end of the questioning time. So thank you very much, Jim. Thank you very much, Brian, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Now, if I can direct your attention to the screens.
Over the last 38 years, CII has helped to improve the predictability and performance of capital projects by developing practices focused on the project delivery process, from front-end planning to startup. Now, Research Team DCC-07 addresses opportunities to improve capital efficiency through competitive investment decisions and effective project delivery. The team has developed a scorecard to access the implementation of management processes that drive capital efficiency. Here to present, please welcome Lokesh Sharma, Kathy Farina, Stephen Cabano, and Carlos Caldas.
So, good morning, everyone. Hopefully that's working. Welcome to DCC-07, the Driving Capital Project Efficiency. So we've heard the word efficiency all day yesterday, big focus today. We're going to take a look at this in a little different light. It's kind of the relationship between the project team and the business team. So before we get started here, what we'd like to see is just kind of a show of hands. How many owners are in the audience today? Okay. How many EPC contractor, engineering and or construction contractors? And then how about service providers or academia and so on? Okay, so it's kind of a third, which is good because we're going to have the second thing is get your cell phones ready because we are going to use the cell phone for a little bit here in the beginning of the session and kind of have you use the QR reader to answer a question. But you'll see that there's kind of a different perspective versus owners versus contractors and so on when we talk about efficiency. The last thing is this one's a little different. This presentation is a little different in that most of the feedbacks that you're receiving yesterday and today are completed research efforts. This is midstream. We're pick a percentage, 50, 60% complete. The effort, it was planned that way, but we wanted to give you all an update of where we stand on the effort. So before we get started in that, let's talk about the industry a little bit. Whatever resource you use to kind of take a look at activity in the industry, and you can see two of these that are up on the screen right now. But if you look at the investments that were being made last year, even through the pandemic, this year, and moving forward, it's substantial. Greater than $100 billion just in kind of the U.S. Gulf Coast. Huge opportunity. You look at greater than a 20% increase in kind of our midstream and downstream activity. Huge opportunity, right? So the market's there. The opportunity to improve on how we execute our projects is there. Let's look at the other side of this. Right? If you take a look at, and this is no secret or anything, this is just kind of a rehash of information that we've seen for the last number of years. Our projects have not been, at least large-scale or mega-scale capital projects, have not been that successful. When you take a look at whether it's Ernst & Young or any of the other consulting organizations, major overruns, from both a cost and schedule side, and a lot of those are not, slight overruns. They're massive overruns. 50% kind of thing, 30% overruns. You take a look at kind of the return, the shareholder value from an owner standpoint. and the, kind of the middle analysis here on refining. When you're looking at margins 2 to 2.5%, who's investing in those types of opportunities today? And you look at the competitiveness on other projects that are out there. Where are owners going to be spending their capital? So, now there's challenge on where you spend the money. So, huge opportunity, from an overall capital investment portfolio, but we've got some work to do from a standpoint of making sure that we're executing to what our expectations are. So, this is where your cell phones come in. What we'd like to do, and you can either use the QR code on the right-hand side, or go to menti.com and you can see the code that you'd enter into menti.com. And what we'd like you to do is to answer, what does capital efficiency mean to you? 1 or 2 words. What we're going to put up on the screen here is a word cloud, and you see it on the right-hand side. And if you look at this as it grows, right, hopefully we can execute more projects. Lower cost, right? You see things like profitability. Obviously, that's, if we can be more efficient, hopefully it's generating more profit. Lower cost, right? So when you look at this, and it'll continue growing here as you input more information, but there are some similarities between kind of the owner orientation of capital efficiency and what your contractors and service providers might be looking at. But a lot of similarities, some differences, and that's what we want to focus on as we move forward here. Thanks for your input there. So the research team, when we were established some months ago, we took a look at a number of different things. And one of the primary things that we indicated or found out was there was a lack of definition of what efficiency, capital efficiency, meant across the industry. Second to that, we also found that there was a lack of how we measure it. First of all, what does capital efficiency mean? But then also, what are the metrics that we're using to say, yeah, hey, we are getting more efficient and so on. And then if you take a look at the last one here, the business and project team owners and contractors had a different perspective on capital efficiency. And this has been an issue across the industry for forever, right? When you look at what an owner would like to obviously spend less capital, right? Because it's kind of a negative on their balance sheet. And contractors make their money on projects, so they'd like to see that number up. So there's a kind of a deviation on that. So as a research team, what we took on as some initial actions here are kind of defining what capital efficiency means, and I'll get into that here in a moment. And then what are some of the methodologies or the metrics that we'll use to kind of measure this as we progress through? And then how do we get this alignment between not only internal to your organization, from kind of the business side of the organization to the project side, but also owner, contractor, supplier alignment as well. So these are some of the challenges that we started out with in our research effort. When we take a look at kind of very simple diagram here, right? Looking at alignment. We have the business organization. Now I'm going to kind of correlate this more to the owner side, right? The business has certain strategic goals, certain strategic direction, and what we need to make sure is we've got alignment with our projects. Pretty simple equation, right? But what we found out in the research, and this was our own internal research as well as capturing research from past efforts and so on. And both of these statements are very similar, but if you take a look at it, that the performance of projects, when you have the business folks and the project folks aligned, right? So there's clear understanding of what's important to the business and a clear understanding of how the projects are going to deliver that, then ultimately the project results are better. It's not rocket science, right? But it's amazing how often that breaks down. Whether either the business people just don't understand projects, or we don't do a good job of communicating kind of the risks and so on, or the business climate changes, which obviously we've seen in the last 18 months. But when that breaks down, that's when projects start to provide less value to our owner organizations. So when you take a look, bring that diagram back that we looked at a little bit before, and let's take a look at the right-hand side, right? So if capital efficiency, if we can execute our projects more efficiently, and that's by setting better baselines, achieving those baselines, and then meeting those cost schedule expectations and so on, by doing things either in a smarter way or a more efficient way. We just heard an example of that, right? What a great world we'd have, right? So that's going to support the business because we're going to achieve those projects hopefully at a less of a cost and so on and so forth. But let's take a look at the left-hand side, right? When we look at our capital delivery processes, right? Half the value of those processes is we're going to do projects better. We're going to set the baselines, we're going to communicate those baselines, and we're going to execute to those baselines. But the other half is choosing the right projects, right? And again, if you want to really make how you spend your capital the most effective way possible, we've got to choose the right projects. And I say this constantly, that every owner that we deal with has more opportunities than they have capital, right? So they've got to make a decision on which projects move into that portfolio to maximize the effectiveness of how they execute how they execute that capital that they have. And it works two ways, right? I can either reduce the capital spend, my capital portfolio, or if I keep the capital at the same level, I can execute more projects, right? Because I'm doing them more efficiently and so on. So when you look down here at the project organization, you've got the owner's project team, you've got our contractors, suppliers, all part of this equation to support that alignment. If you don't have everybody aligned, then any piece of this that kind of breaks off and is not aligned creates inefficiencies and problems. So when you take a look at the capital efficiency, again, more from an owner standpoint, right? It says the measure of an organization's ability to define, develop, manage competitive projects that optimize the return on investment across the life cycle, right? Pretty simple stuff, right? But when we look at the opportunities that are out there, this is that group of opportunities that the owner has that I said is usually more than the capital they have to spend. You've got two sides of this, right? You've got the projects that are going to provide more products or products within a region that they haven't executed in before. So you got market or business-driven type opportunities. That makes up a portion of the portfolio. But probably the first part of the portfolio has to support the right-hand side of this, right? And those are the projects that you kind of have to do, right? They're regulatory-driven type projects. They're mandated type projects. Capital efficiency on both of these is critically important. If I can execute those required projects on the right-hand side more efficiently, more effectively, then I've got more money to spend on the left-hand side type projects, which obviously add the value to the organization. So again, nothing new to this, but that alignment between the business folks and us here in this room and how we communicate that is kind of that secret sauce that we're focusing on here. So when you look at this continuum of improving capital efficiency, the top left-hand side talks about cost. And if we can execute these projects more efficiently and reduce the cost side of the equation, again, what a great thing, right? But equally as important is schedule. If we can reduce the schedule or provide more realistic, more confident schedules, that's going to help the top right-hand side, which is the business return, right? Execute a project faster for less money. We can increase whatever financial calculation you're looking at, rate of return, net present value, those types of things. But equally as important in all of this is how it contributes to the day-to-day operations. We run these facilities for 20, 30, 60, 75 years in some cases, right? So if we can build in some of that, and some of the questions in the previous session were around operations. We can't just focus on the capital cost reduction if we're going to run these facilities for a long period of time. So again, nothing new here, but it's how do you get the projects to support the business. You know, we separate capital and expense in a lot of our owner organizations. It's still the company's money, right? So how do you optimize that whole life cycle opportunity within the organization? So I spent a lot of time talking about the owner benefits, and that's the left-hand side here. So how does this help the contractors in the room, which again, there were about a third of you, and the other third on suppliers, service providers, and so on. If we can achieve this, right, by having more efficient projects and selecting the better projects, ultimately there will be more projects, right, from an owner's side. So then the contractors have more opportunities. The question previously in the intensification session was, well, how does this affect the contractors? You all have to get smarter, right? And look at where you excel within this industry to support what's happening, whether it's in intensification, this better alignment, and so on. So that, you know, the cheese is moved, if I use a phrase from years ago. And I've always said, you know, it's hard to be a taxi driver today because of the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. You have to figure out where you fit into this equation. So there are opportunities for both the contractors and the suppliers, but you got to figure out how you fit into the mix. So I'm going to hand it off to Kathy now, and she's going to give us a little bit more about the research.
Thank you, Stephen. So hello, everyone. So in order to really achieve those key improvement areas or factors that Stephen was talking about that drive project capital efficiency, we really need to strategically align the business side with the project side. And that's kind of what we've been talking about. We're going to be talking about a little bit more, and Stephen kind of touched on it in the previous slides there. And in order to do that, you really need to look at those management processes. So the business management processes and the project management processes, and how they relate to those key improvement areas and capital efficiency for the project itself. So this really will involve that early engagement and that strategic alignment of those key stakeholders, so both the project and the business side, to ensure those key business processes are implemented and the key project processes are planned for. And we're looking at that as early in the project phase as possible. So we're saying around the business planning phase would be ideal. So the research team itself was formed with a variety of very experienced and passionate people, and we really came together with a common purpose. And that common purpose was really to define what project capital efficiency is, as there was very, very different views on that. Also on how do you achieve project capital efficiency. So that was another one that we really had a common goal on. And we wanted to develop a scorecard that projects can use to see how capital efficient their projects are. So as a team, we really reviewed and streamlined many different processes, so management for the business side and for the project side. We streamlined these down to 28 key management processes that we felt impacted project capital efficiency and those key improvement areas that was previously discussed. We also looked at different questions and that really are under each one of these processes that will be asked as part of the scorecard that really drive that project capital efficiency. And we also are in the process of defining that assessment methodology as part of the scorecard as well. So as you can see here on the screen, there is, these are the management processes. Then there is both, we've kind of got them in two categories. One on the corporate capital management, and that's kind of the business side. And then we've got the second category being the capital project deployment, and that's on the project side. So those are the management processes related to those. And we further define them into 4 groups. So the first 2 groups, the first group being the corporate and financial strategy, and that's on the business side, looking really on the corporate capital planning, the strategic scenario analysis, the project prioritization. So those are kind of the business focuses for those management processes. And the second group would be the capital governance and planning. So that one would be stakeholder management, you got project governance, and how they relate to the business objectives for the project. And the other 2 groups are kind of related to the project side. So those are related more to the project. We got the capital project expectations, and this will talk about kind of the HSE expectations, the quality expectations, looking at your value improvement processes, that selection for what you choose for those, and those would include, say, modularization, class of facilities, those type of VIPs. And the last group would be the project planning and delivery. And that's talking a lot about the scope development, team organization, standards and specifications, and also change management, which is very important. Just to note that the CII best practices are all included in all these management processes. So they're incorporated in all of the management processes, which is a great thing. So looking a little bit more around the timing around the tool, when we were having a lot of the workshops and brainstorming sessions, this tool we really feel is intended to be used early in the project as possible. We're even saying as early as that business planning phase. So that's kind of when the first assessment point we feel that you would use the scorecard. And then you would have other assessment points as you would be being able to have a little bit more information and maybe answer the questions a little bit more. So right at project initiation, feasibility, and maybe the concept phase as well. So how do you use the scorecard? So this is a little bit more about the scorecard. So we have, for each category of that scorecard, we have a series of management processes, which I just went through. And each one of those management processes have specific questions that are related to each one of those processes. And they are really driven from those key improvement areas that drive project capital efficiency. So the intent would be to have a facilitated workshop that would have all those key stakeholders together from the business side and the project side. And they would then discuss, review, and answer those questions under each one of those management processes. And the one thing, as they're answering it, the key thing that we really want to bring up is that strategic alignment between the business side and the project side. And when they're answering those questions, that's where they're going to gain a lot of that alignment. So once they answer the questions and they're aligned with all those stakeholders that are including those project stakeholders in the early business planning phase, they'll generate a capital efficiency score. And so what you can use, and when you're looking at that score, you can look at all those management processes, and you can address any of the gaps, so any of the lower scores, any of the processes where you see some of those gaps you want to address and make sure that you have action plans to improve those processes. And then those higher scores, you want to look at those management processes as well and look at and capture and build on those strengths and make sure those aren't lost through the project. So just a little bit of an example. We wanted to throw an example up here on what one of the management processes look like. And this one's the project CapEx and investment return analysis. And that one's related to the corporate capital management, so the business side. So as you can see here, the management process is related to calculating the return on investment for your project. And some of the questions the stakeholders would be asked would be around, does that analysis meet or exceed the minimum financial requirements? But most importantly, is it communicated and are they aligned with all the stakeholders that are part of that workshop, including those project stakeholders we've been talking about? So once those questions have been answered and aligned, which is very key, that strategic alignment, you'll get a score. And each one of those management processes will get a score, And then there'll be an overall project capital efficiency score. So I'm going to introduce here Lokesh to come up and talk a little bit more about this capital efficiency score and our path forward.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Steve, Kathy. I had some originally prepared comments, just before I get in my topic, but really interesting conference. From the presentations I heard yesterday, it really relates very well with our research going on, the one we're talking about. So the first observation was yesterday, reduction in capital workforce. Both people working don't want to have mobility, right? That was the first one I heard. Second one I heard was we have to be competitive, benchmarking, yes, yesterday. And then I also heard low carbon yesterday. And then this morning, modular the units and reducing cycle time and cost. So it all kind of ties up, and this is in the front of all the things we've been talking about, right? So this is really selecting the right project, having a portfolio understanding and putting the resources on the right thing, time, money, people, right? So to continue on with where Steve and Kathy have been talking, it's in our business today, coming out of COVID, or we are somewhere out of COVID, we really need to be laser focused on picking the right projects, which are competitive. And it starts with portfolio alignment with projects. So I'm a project guy. I like to go build stuff, where most of us are engineers or some kind of techies, right, in the room here. But we need to slow down and think through, are we putting the money on the right project? Steve was touching on it. On one of those slides he had, capital efficiency and capital effectiveness. The capital effectiveness is, a lot of you are owners here. You can think if you save a few $1 million in your CapEx, there's so many other projects which can generate value and use those few $1 million, right? Minimizing cycle time, picking the right project, putting it back in the hopper to make more money, right? And overall, good for total stockholder returns, right? So if we keep moving on, so those were my opening comments. We can get in the tool, but that's sort of the big picture there, right? So if you look at the capital efficiency scorecard here, it's split, like Kathy was saying, in two core groups, corporate capital management and the capital project deployment side. It's really critical to pick the right projects for all of us. Owners, ops, maintenance, technical, contractors, EPs, suppliers. Laser focus, even more than before. We've got all kind of projects, short cycle time return, site sustaining capital projects, compliance projects, low carbon projects. So let's look at a little bit at the capital efficiency scorecard here. So the outputs are really at a high level in two categories here. Like I said, so a lot of us geek engineers here, we like numbers. What does that 78.5 and 70 and 60 mean? Research is on. We're getting there, right? And see, if we drill down a little bit on, let's just pick on two categories here, project governance and project target setting. Not to read it, but I'll pick on one on the left side. So you get credit. This is a little bit about the tool, you get credit if you say yes. If you answer yes to a question, that's what's projected behind. The two yeses add up to 48%. And there's a few no's, so you don't get a score if you have a no. So if I take on the first one, is a project governance structure defined and included in the project charter? That's really key. You need to have a project governance structure set up early on. Who are the decision makers? What's the funding mechanism? How are we going to manage change? How do we make investment decisions based on change in dollar prices, right? So those kind of questions is what's going to stimulate that discussion to answer that question. The other one, like a yeah, if I pick another one, let's say a no. Are the approved project budget and schedule aligned with the available corporate funding and agreed business drivers? They have to be. In this case, we're saying no. So it's potentially going to lead a delay in project. Mostly in the early phases, they're going to keep churning in concept development, right? because they'll be looking for funding. They'll keep churning to get an alternative with lower money, right? Money spent, and that just spends a lot of time, not effective use of resources. If you look on the right side, project target setting, that's critical, right? You got to have goals, objectives for a project. So if you look at some of those questions there, have the project targets been defined and included in the project charter? And the answer is yes. Very critical. But if you look on the flip side, has it been communicated? The answer is no, the number 3 on your left, right? You need to have that communication and alignment on things like project target setting with the right people in the business and the projects, right? So looking at the full value chain from like cradle to grave, CII best practices are incorporated from, as you look from your left to the right. We've got some great, best practices incorporated into tools in the FEL, like the PDRI, which is mid-FEL, end of FEL, and similarly in design construction, we've got the construction readiness assessment, which leads to, good selected, competitively selected projects planned for a good execution, safe construction, safe commissioning startup, and making money based on what we decided on early. So Kathy had a slide similar to this one where we were pointing to the capital efficiency scorecard, decision point being between the red business planning and the FEL, or the front-end planning, right? So path forward, what do we ask? So Steve and Kathy touched on this. It's research is in progress. We're stepping on the gas. Daniel is here somewhere. He's been telling us to finish it up sooner than soon. The team is working diligently. Everybody's got daytime jobs. But path forward is finalize the capital efficiency scorecard and its deployment. We're looking at November this year. That's the target. And we have an ask from the audience. You could be DCC members or not. You could not be CII members. You're all welcome to participate in the pilots. That'll help us with getting feedback from you, improving this scorecard, and we will get real-time user feedback, right? So that's one of the asks, and we plan to benchmark after piloting, deploying, and using the scorecard, and engaging with the upcoming CII overarching capital efficiency project, which is the bigger umbrella up on the top. So I want to take this moment to thank the team that's listed here, recognize them. I've had the pleasure to work with a very functionally diverse team, which includes owners, contractors, and suppliers, you can see, And I want to thank the academia from UT. So they've done a super job. I think they've kept us project or people in routine company business, on track in our meetings, and really good, it's been very stimulating. And the team has been really focused on results. This team that we are working on, results and timing of delivering a complete scorecard. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention and your attendance, and we'll open it up for Q&A.
Thank you very much. So I think the first question that's on a lot of people's mind, is this like a credit card score where no matter what you do, you can't get to the perfect number? And I guess the question that ties in with that, what is a good score in your tool?
Well, we don't know the answer to that yet, right? So we, as Stephen mentioned, we are kind of 80% in terms of research development. This is a team that started working at the end of October, early November, primarily working in a virtual environment. And in the first few steps was kind of reach alignment in terms of what are the definitions, what are the things that we need to focus, what's the process that we're going to be using. And now we are to the point that we have identified this process, we have these definitions, we have the questions, the scorecard framework is ready, and we are going to start the testing and the validation of that over the next few months. And that's kind of like kind of in terms of the call for action and request to help us with that effort in the next 3-4 months.
Yeah, I think I can add to that, if you think about how the PDRI matters evolved, because I was on that research team, the PDRI had been well established. We added the accuracy portion, but then we went out and actually tested it on projects, right? So then the target scores come from where you have good projects versus bad projects in the scale. So that's still to come. And then what that target score will be will kind of be a result of that research or those case studies.
Great that you brought up PDRI, because that is the next question. It seems like this has some overlap with the PDRI. How did these two tools interact? Is there an overlap or not? And if so, what are the overlap areas?
I'll take that one since I was involved in both of them. Yes, there is a bit of an overlap, but if you remember the chart that Lokesh put up here 3 or 4 slides ago, this is really intended to be in those FEL0, FEL1 type phases, is to make sure that we've got the alignment between the business and the project people, right? So that we're not going out and charging ahead with an idea that it sounded like somebody's, one person's good idea, but the rest of the business unit isn't aligned with it. If you think about what's in the PDRI, there's the first section within the PDRI that kind of does overlap this, right? Your operating philosophy, your maintenance philosophies, and so forth are business type drivers. So it was done on purpose, right? Is to have that continuum, because then it transitions into your construction readiness a little bit later on. So they're very different tools, but there is some overlap.
Maybe I'll add some comment. I think I've used the PDRI, haven't worked in the development, but used it as an owner. I think that tool misses the business planning interaction. We don't have planners in the room when we are using the PDRI tool. So you're right, Steve. There is discussion around operating philosophy, maintainability, reliability, but this, I think, is really focused on even before you get there, like you said, FEL0. Right?
Yep.
Yeah, make sure that you have everything ready to be able to start front-end planning and eventually do it good in terms of the scope development and execution later on. So I think the key point was get earlier. I think PDRI focused in one project and assessing the level of scope definition for that project. Now we want the purpose of the capital efficiency scorecard is to improve, go a little bit earlier, make sure that the project and the business are aligned. And with that alignment, you not only benefit that project that goes through front-end planning and execution, but that alignment will also help the business side in terms of defining what are the best projects and so on, more like the capital effectiveness that Stephen and Lokesh mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think part of it is to stop those I'll call them pet projects that kind of get some momentum, but are not really focused necessarily on the ultimate business vision. And somehow they get into the process and they catch momentum, and the next thing you know, you're going and executing this. And you can execute a great project, but if it's the wrong project, are you really adding value to the organization? And I think that's what the tool really focuses on in those front-end phases.
And the other aspect of that is that you see the example from the MCPI project before. So there are a lot of aspects of project planning and execution and engineering and new equipment development that suppliers have and so on that the business side is not aware of, right? And if you increase this communication, yeah, business is going to learn from engineering, construction, and so on, and they may come up with better business decision that's going to improve the corporate capital efficiency.
The next question is going to dig under the hood a little bit. Is the waiting
Kathy, this is yours.
I know, of course.
Is the weighting for each question the same? If not, how did you assign weights to the various questions?
Oh.
So that's the process that we are going on right now. So we did a survey where we assessed what's the relative importance of each of those management processes as they contribute to capital efficiency, and also the weight relative to the questions associated with each management process. So the data to do all of that has been collected. We recently completed the surveys that are capturing these weights. We also have the framework of the tool ready, in kind of an Excel spreadsheet. And we are just putting the pieces together and going through this testing phase, which will be the next step in the development.
Yeah, it would be they're different weighted, depending. Yeah.
Is the scorecard intended to be used by all stakeholders, owners, EPCs, suppliers? Who is the intended audience to use the tool?
So the intended audience, well, it's all of the above, but in looking at, when you think about the owner and especially bringing the business side of the owner to the equation. So we envision this to be a joint assessment where we bring the business team and the project team, and by project team, remember from Steven's slide, it's not only the owner project team, it's bringing key contractors, key suppliers earlier, because they are the ones who, well, they may have the ideas, they may need to have the understanding of what's important for the project, and then reach an alignment in key aspects that are going to contribute not only to better project execution, but also to better allocation of capital.
Maybe just to summarize, Dr. Carlos, is it'll be used by owners along with participation with contractors and suppliers, because 90% or more of the work actually is executed by contractors and suppliers for the owners, right?
Yeah, I think just the contractors over the years have moved up the chain from an owner standpoint, right? So it used to be that the contractors only built the overall facility, all the engineering was done by the owners. Now the contractors are taking on almost 100% of the phase 3 type work. But now we're also seeing contractors kind of supporting the owners in alternative selection and things like that. So ultimately, the contractors have to, and suppliers, by the way, so bringing in the equipment vendors and even some of the concepts that we heard earlier this morning. But the ultimate goal is that everybody is aligned as you start to then get into developing the opportunity. If you have disconnects anywhere along the way, that's risk, and obviously that's when we start to blow budgets and schedules and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because if you look at one of the common things of many of the CI best practice, when you think about planning for modularization, advanced work packaging, and others, you're seeing more and more the need to have this early engagement of contractors and suppliers during the front-end planning phase. And I think what we're saying that we need to start even earlier, right? And so I think what we're proposing is aligned with what's the natural trend. If you want to really make a big impact, not only on the project, but at the portfolio level, at the corporate level, you need to have this better integration early on.
Think about any of the I2PD, any of these initiatives, even advanced work packaging. Many owners today are actually bringing on a contractor to kind of work on their behalf all the way up into phase 2. So they have to be part of this, the assessment, right? Because they're going to be playing that owner's role.
It's being more collaborative, like getting that collaboration up earlier on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to add, so this is probably the first or one of the first studies that CII did that is related to capital efficiency. So a lot of the work that the team did in the beginning is to kind of better understand what capital efficiency means for owners, contractors, metrics out there. So in a sense, this team is starting, let's say, a new area of research. As was mentioned yesterday, there's a plan to continue, have another research team going broader with capital efficiency. Yeah, we had to start.
Just those two words, efficiency and effectiveness, were challenging.
Yeah.
So we got quite a few questions left. We'll do a few rapid fire ones, get through a bunch of them.
Okay.
So effectiveness and efficiency,
Yep.
That's the next question. Is the target to measure effectiveness and efficiency in separate scores?
So I'll take the first, and then Carlos, you can. The main focus of this tool is the efficiency side, right? It's to address a project, right? Some of the other activities that CII is taking on are going to be around the effectiveness side of it, but it'll take the efficiency portion of that. And I hope I said that right.
No, that's exactly right. Because we see this strategic alignment important for both. right? But there's definitely, the way that we focus in terms of the scorecard is focus more, okay, you have this alignment to make sure that you're gonna execute the project the best way possible. But the management processes that we identified are also gonna help with project, the capital effectiveness part. It's just that it was not the main focus in terms of the scorecard. Look at the portfolio planning. So we focus more on the project execution planning and the better interface between the business and planning side. I think one natural extension in the future, in terms of future research, is look at the other side, how we can improve the capital effectiveness and, looking at portfolio and corporate level aspects.
I'm going to try to squeeze in two more quick ones.
Go for it.
Where can we find the scorecard?
So the scorecard, in terms of our
It's in Carlos's desk right now because it's not established 100%
Well, the
yet.
plan is to deliver it to the DCC by the board meeting, right? So the end of October, early November is when we expect to have finished the development of the scorecard, which includes kind of the testing and functional validation. And then at that point on, that's going to be available. And then we're going to have to work with CII in terms of how we're going to do maybe some training or maybe a webinar to kind of
I think the key is that you all, once this gets rolled out in its testing mode, that you get involved. That's part of the value of this, is to get your input, to set that score of what's good, what's bad type of thing. It's going to come from testing this and getting your input.
Get some use cases.
And the last one, we're out of time, but one last quick one. How can we express interest in participating? Who do you reach out to?
Well, to reach out to me. Yeah, so that will be probably the best contact. And I'll make information available for CII so that if anyone is interested, you can contact me. You can also go through the DCC, the Downstream and Chemicals Committee, because this is the committee that it's sponsoring the research project. So yeah, we welcome help. Because one of the challenges that we faced a lot was, especially like, how can you bring more the business side of the organizations to participate in this process? And I think this is what delayed us a little bit, because when you look at the CII and the teams, you have a very strong participation from the project side, but bringing the business together has been a challenge, but that's the main benefit, I think, of all of that, is try to bring them on board.
That's why we're all here, because we want to bring everyone together. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you to the presenters for Team PCC 07. Now I'd like to invite Stephen Mulva to the stage to make an award presentation.
We're going to take a break here in just a few minutes. Before we do, we have a really important award presentation. And before I start on that, I just wanted to take a moment to tell you to make sure that you fill out the surveys in the conference app. So this is a really important part of what we do. We've had two great presentations already this morning. Please give your feedback on those, and also the ones yesterday and also later today. And when we do take the break, it'll be 40 minutes long. We'll reconvene at exactly 10:40. You'll want to get here right on time, a few minutes before that, for Anirban Basu, who's, many of you know, Anirban, very energetic speaker, really great content, so you don't want to miss that. Okay, so what I'm here to talk about right now is one of CII's main awards, the Richard L. Tucker Leadership and Service Award. It recognizes an individual who's contributed significantly to the advancement of CII's mission and success as an organization. For those of you who don't know who Richard Tucker is, he was the founder of CII in 1983 and its first director for 15 years. CII proudly presents its Richard L. Tucker Award to Steve Cabano for his tireless service of the Institute. By the way, Steve's colleagues are all watching this online. It's being live streamed to the entire organization. Steve is come on up, Steve. Steve is the president of Pathfinder. It's a leading consulting firm in the projects industry. He brings more than 30 years of wisdom and experience to his clients, and when he served as the chair of CII, the board really relied on his leadership and advice on so many important things that we were working on. Pathfinder joined CII in 2006, and Steve quickly became engaged as the Board of Advisors representative and on the Strategic Planning Committee. Since then, as you see, he's been all over CII, many research teams, benchmarking committee, implementation committee, strategic planning, executive committee. There's probably way more than that. But we just really, really appreciate everything that he does for us. As an example of his commitment to CII, just 2 weeks ago, Steve pulled an all-nighter, working with the CII member half a world away. A lot of you guys have experienced this, obviously, on Teams and Zoom. For Jim, made sure I mentioned Teams. But as soon as he ended that call, he immediately got on a call with our team and a new CI member that was located in France to talk to them about PDRI and construction readiness. So he's a just phenomenal team player and leader. He always does his best to go the extra mile for anybody in the entire CII family. Lately, he's really been instrumental in helping position CII for the future and positioning the engineering and construction industry for the future. So as the chair emeritus, he's been helping us with the wider industry alliance, championing that with CII-CURT and other leading groups. He's also become a very strong advocate for Operating System 2.0. He's now a sought-after speaker on that topic around the world. I think the last one we were on was like at 2 a.m. To India. So that was exciting.
It's an interesting work schedule.
And one of the last things I'll say is sort of at a personal level, I think the secret to Steve's success is really how supportive he is of people in the industry. I think that's what makes him such a great leader. I've really been fortunate to work with you, Steve, and really learn from you. His professionalism is really something to aspire to and to behold. And I've been challenged by you, but it's always been very positive. And when he was the chair, I learned a lot. I really loved working with him. And I think ultimately that's the thing here. Our members, our staff, our volunteers have always benefited from your leadership. And I think that's what made him the unanimous selection for the Richard L. Tucker Leadership and Service Award this year. So please congratulate Steve.
Thank you. Ooh, look at that.
There you go.
Very nice. I'll let you hold that for a little
bit.
And I'm not sure how I'm going to get that home, but...
we can mail it.
Well, thank you. Obviously, honored to be nominated and selected for this award. Humbled, from just the people that are in this room, as well as other members of CII. We're not a huge consulting company. We're a little organization based out of New Jersey. But we have a pretty good impact in the industry, and CII, happens to be a big part of that. So there's some people I'd like to kind of thank to get to here. I don't see that award as being necessarily a personal award. There's a lot of reinforcement that goes behind me kind of being the figurehead that allows me to be nominated and ultimately selected. So kind of in a certain order, but first, my wife. This is not an easy industry. Long hours. Stephen mentioned just here recently, it's gotten a little more skewed here in the last 18 months with the whole pandemic. But it takes reinforcement in the home life to be able to do those things, to be able not only to support our business, but obviously to promote CII around the world as well. Second would be my parents. And some of you know my father. He's been an anchor in the industry for, he's going to hate me for saying this, but probably around 65, 70 years. He'll be 88 years old here. Still practices in the industry. His work ethic, he and my mother's upbringing of our family, when you talk about the commitment to the industry and how you treat people and so on, it all stems from that background. Thirdly would be the kind of my present and past colleagues within the organization. Again, going out there and promoting CII is and implementing a lot of these tools and practices and so on is, it's a team effort again. And the reinforcement of our staff that gets us there. Again, I'm just the figurehead for that. Fourthly, would be you all. I mean, obviously, to make what CII is and the CII-CURT alliance going forward, you're engaged in all of that, right? To make that happen, to make these practices, these tools, and so on effective in the industry, takes a commitment from all of us, not only in this room but the organizations that you all represent. And then lastly, obviously, it's the executive committee for thinking of me first of all, and me and Pathfinder, but then also going through that process of ultimately selecting me. I think this industry is fantastic. If you've been around the industry any time, you've heard my father say this. It's a microcosm of the world, right? I mean, everything that we do either reflects what's going on in the world or, supports what's going on in the world. I look at CII and now with the alliance with CURT, that we're part of that, leading that industry to bigger and better things. You see that we've got some opportunity for improvement as generations change, as the world changes. We've got to react accordingly. But I think we're positioned to be able to do that, especially with the alliance moving, if it moves forward, and hopefully you're all on board with it moving forward. So thanks again, and again, honored, humbled, and really appreciative of the award. Thank you all.
Congratulations. Okay, take your break. We'll see you back here just before 10:40.